Safkari floated in his observation pod, looking at the mission file on his screen. The blue letters glowed against the dark background as he read the same words for the third time. He was going to observe humans, the species that had just learned to travel between stars. His supervisor, Elder Vestan, had given him this assignment yesterday. The synthesis needed to know about these humans. Were they peaceful? Could they join the Galactic Collective? Or were they another violent species that would destroy themselves? The report said humans were fighting a war. Their enemy was the Vraktari, a species known for their cruel methods and powerful weapons. The Vraktari had attacked human colonies without warning. Now both species were locked in battle near a star system called Kepler 442. Safkari had studied many species before. Most new civilizations fell into clear patterns. They either learned to cooperate and joined peaceful societies, or they fought until nothing remained. The humans seemed to be heading toward the second option. His ship, the Silent Watcher, was equipped with the best hiding technology the synthesis had created. No species had ever detected their observation vessels. He could watch the humans fight and record everything without being seen. The journey to human space took 12 standard cycles. Safkari spent the time reading about both species. The Vraktari were warriors. They had conquered 47 star systems using superior technology and ruthless tactics. They never showed mercy to enemies. Humans were different. They had only been in space for 50 of their years. Their technology was basic compared to other species. Their weapons were simple. Their ships were small and weak. According to the data, they should have been defeated within days of the first Vraktari attack. But the war had been going on for 3 months. When the Silent Watcher reached the edge of the Kepler 442 system, Safkari activated his sensors. What he saw confused him. The system should have been empty except for Vraktari ships claiming victory. Instead, he detected active combat. Human ships were still fighting. Safkari moved closer, keeping his ship hidden behind a large asteroid. His sensors showed him the full picture. A human colony called New Denver sat on the third planet. The colony had mining operations that both sides wanted to control. The Vraktari fleet was massive. 57 ships, including 12 battlecruisers. Their weapons could destroy entire cities. Their shields could stop most attacks. They had enough firepower to glass the planet's surface. The human fleet was tiny in comparison. 18 ships, most showing damage from previous battles. Their largest vessel was something called the UES Defiance. The data said it was commanded by Admiral Jake Morrison. Safkari had expected to arrive and find human wreckage floating in space. Instead, he watched as human ships moved in formation around the planet. They were still fighting, still protecting their colony. The first thing that surprised him was how the humans communicated. Their radio channels were full of chatter. Pilots talked to each other constantly. They shared information, made jokes, and encouraged teammates. The Vraktari rarely spoke during battle except to give orders. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the communications clearly. He was talking to his captains, explaining their next move. His tone was calm, almost friendly. He sounded like he was discussing the weather, not planning a battle against impossible odds. Lisa, take the Phoenix and cover Sector 7. Sam, your Marines need to hold the eastern landing zone for another 6 hours. Tony, keep those fighters tight on my wing. Safkari checked his translation systems. They were working correctly. The human admiral was using first names during a major battle. He was treating his officers like family members instead of military units. The Vraktari commander, war leader Krextoth, spoke only to give harsh orders. His subordinates responded with fear. There was no warmth in their communications, only discipline and terror. As Safkari watched, a squad of Vraktari fighters attacked a damaged human destroyer. The ship was called the U.S. Phoenix, commanded by Captain Lisa Rodriguez. Her vessel was leaking atmosphere and had lost 2 of its 3 engines. Any reasonable commander would retreat. The ship was clearly doomed. Captain Rodriguez did something else entirely. She turned her damaged destroyer toward the attacking fighters and opened fire with everything she had left. Her weapons were weaker than theirs, but she used them with precision. She managed to destroy 3 enemy fighters before they could react. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was what she said while fighting. "Come on, you ugly bugs. Is that the best you can do? My grandmother fights better than this, and she's been dead for 20 years. She was joking while facing death. Safkari had observed hundreds of battles. Species usually became quiet and focused when fighting for survival. They conserved energy for essential communications. But humans seemed to gain energy from talking and joking during combat. On the planet's surface, Marine Colonel Sam Blake was defending the colony's evacuation sites. His forces were outnumbered 5-1. They had been fighting for 18 hours without rest. Their ammunition was running low. Colonel Blake's voice came through the communications as he talked to his soldiers. "Remember, people, we're not here to win pretty. We're here to buy time for the civilians. Every minute we hold gives another transport ship a chance to escape." His Marines responded with enthusiasm instead of fear. They called out targets to each other. They celebrated successful hits. They even sang while reloading their weapons. One Marine, Private First Class Tony Russo, was holding a narrow passage by himself. Enemy soldiers had been trying to break through his position for 3 hours. He had killed dozens of them, but more kept coming. Any normal soldier would have retreated or called for backup. Tony Russo started singing louder. "We are the Marines, the fighting machines," his voice carried over the battle sounds. "We fight for freedom and the American dream." Zefkari didn't understand the words, but he could hear the defiance in the human's voice. This soldier was facing certain death and responding with music. The Vraktari were getting frustrated. Their standard tactics worked against every other species. They would attack with overwhelming force, cause heavy casualties, and watch their enemies break and run. Humans weren't breaking. They weren't running. They were getting louder and more aggressive as the battle continued. War leader Krextoth tried a new approach. He sent a message to Admiral Morrison demanding surrender. The message promised to spare civilian lives if the humans stopped fighting immediately. Admiral Morrison's response was short. "We don't negotiate with species that attack civilian colonies. You want this system? Come and take it." Then Morrison did something that shocked Zefkari. He shared Krextoth's surrender demand with every human in the system. Instead of causing panic, it caused laughter. Captain Rodriguez spoke for many when she said, "Did that squid face really think we'd just give up? He obviously doesn't know who he's fighting." Zefkari began to understand that he wasn't observing a normal military conflict. These humans fought differently than any species he had studied. They seemed to treat warfare as something personal rather than strategic. As he prepared his first report, one question dominated his thoughts. How had such a primitive species survived for 3 months against the Vraktari? And more importantly, what would happen when they learned to fight even better? The next day brought the largest battle Zefkari had ever witnessed. War leader Krextoth had decided to end the human resistance with one massive attack. 43 Vraktari ships moved toward New Denver in perfect formation. Admiral Morrison had only 12 ships left to defend the planet. The math was simple. The humans should have been destroyed within an hour. Zefkari watched as the human fleet took positions around the planet. Their ships looked tiny compared to the approaching Vraktari armada. Several human vessels showed severe damage from previous battles. One destroyer was missing its entire front section, but still moved to join the fight. The battle began when Vraktari battle cruisers opened fire from long range. Their plasma cannons sent beams of energy that could cut through most armor like paper. The first volley should have destroyed half the human fleet. Instead, the human ships scattered in all directions. They moved in patterns that seemed random but somehow avoided most of the incoming fire. When weapons did hit, the humans kept fighting even with major damage. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was commanding the UES Phoenix, a destroyer that had lost most of its armor in previous battles. Her ship looked like it should have fallen apart hours ago. Pieces of metal floated around it in space. Atmosphere leaked from multiple holes in the hull, but Rodriguez kept her ship in the fight. When a Vraktari cruiser targeted a human transport full of refugees, she moved the Phoenix directly into the line of fire. The enemy weapons hit her ship instead of the defenseless transport. The Phoenix shook violently as plasma beams tore through its remaining armor. Emergency lights flashed red throughout the ship. Computer systems sparked and died. The artificial gravity failed, leaving the crew floating in zero gravity. Rodriguez spoke to her crew over the ship's internal communications. Her voice was calm despite the chaos around her. "All right, people, we've lost main power and life support. We have maybe 10 minutes of air left, but that transport has 3,000 civilians on board." She paused as another enemy blast shook the ship. "I'm not letting those families die because we gave up early. Engineering, give me everything you can from the backup reactor. Weapons switched to manual targeting. Navigation, prepare for ramming speed. Zefkari couldn't believe what he was hearing. Rodriguez was planning to ram her dying ship into an enemy vessel that was 50 times larger. It was suicide. It was also tactically useless. Her small destroyer couldn't seriously damage a Vraktari battlecruiser. But as the Phoenix accelerated toward the enemy ship, something unexpected happened. The human destroyer's failing reactor began to overload. Rodriguez wasn't just ramming the enemy vessel. She was turning her ship into a massive bomb. "This is Captain Rodriguez to all ships," she broadcast on the general frequency. "The Phoenix is making her final run. It's been an honor serving with you all. Tell my kids their mom went out fighting." The UES Phoenix slammed into the side of the Vraktari battlecruiser just as its reactor exploded. The blast was so bright that Zefkari's sensors temporarily shut down to protect themselves. When the light faded, both ships were gone. 3,000 civilians escaped in the transport while Rodriguez and her crew of 200 gave their lives to save them. The trade should have been devastating to human morale. Losing a ship and experienced crew for one transport seemed like a terrible exchange. Instead, the other human ships fought harder, their communications filled with promises to make the enemy pay for every lost friend. Admiral Morrison's voice came over the radio, clear and determined. "Rodriguez got 3,000 people out. That's 3,000 families who will remember her sacrifice. That's 3,000 reasons why we keep fighting. All ships continue the mission." On the planet's surface, Marine Colonel Sam Blake was facing his own impossible situation. Vraktari ground forces had surrounded the main evacuation site. Thousands of civilian refugees were trapped in underground shelters while enemy soldiers tried to break through the Marine defenses. Blake had started the battle with 800 Marines. After 12 hours of continuous fighting, only 200 were still able to fight. They were almost out of ammunition. Their heavy weapons had been destroyed by enemy fire. Any military manual would say the position was hopeless. Blake should surrender to save civilian lives. Instead, he ordered his Marines to improvise new weapons. They took mining equipment from the colony's industrial sites and turned them into artillery. Drilling machines became missile launchers. Construction vehicles became mobile gun platforms. Private First Class Tony Russo had been holding a critical choke point for 6 hours. This narrow passage was the only way for enemy forces to reach the largest civilian shelter. If Russo fell back, 2,000 people would be trapped. Russo was down to his last ammunition clip and his combat knife. Enemy soldiers kept charging his position in waves. He had killed more than 30 of them, but dozens more were coming. As his ammunition ran out, Russo started singing louder. His voice echoed through the passage as he switched to fighting with just his knife. "We are the Marines, the fighting machines," he sang while stabbing an enemy soldier. "We fight for freedom and the American dream." When a Vraktari warrior managed to wound him badly, Russo kept singing. Blood ran down his arm as he fought 3 enemies at once. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, his voice never wavered even as enemy claws tore at his armor. Zefkari had studied Vraktari psychology. They were predators who used fear as a weapon. They expected enemies to break when facing overwhelming odds. Russo's defiant singing was having the opposite effect. The enemy soldiers were becoming confused and hesitant. After 6 hours, Russo finally fell. But as he died, other Marines immediately rushed to take his position. They picked up his song where he had stopped. The narrow passage filled with human voices singing the same defiant melody. The Vraktari had never faced anything like this. Their enemies usually became quiet and desperate when losing. These humans became louder and more aggressive as their situation got worse. War leader Krextoth tried to understand what he was seeing. His forces had superior numbers, better weapons, and tactical advantages. But the humans refused to acknowledge that they were losing. They fought as if victory was still possible, when any logical analysis said they were doomed. Dr. Ellen Price, the chief scientist aboard the UES Defiance, was studying captured Vraktari equipment while the battle raged around her. Instead of hiding in a safe part of the ship, she had set up her laboratory near the weapons bay. She wanted to examine enemy technology as soon as possible. When Admiral Morrison asked for her preliminary report, Dr. Price shared disturbing news. "Admiral, these weapons are more advanced than our intelligence suggested. The Vraktari have energy shielding we can't penetrate with conventional attacks. Their armor is self-repairing. Their targeting systems are faster than our computers. Morrison listened to her report while coordinating the battle. So you're telling me we can't win with our current technology? Dr. Price smiled, which surprised Zefkari. A scientist should be worried about such news, not pleased. I'm telling you, we need to get creative. I have some ideas about combining their technology with ours. Give me 12 more hours and I might have something useful. 12 hours. She was asking for time to invent new weapons in the middle of a battle. The request should have been impossible to grant. Admiral Morrison considered her words for a moment. You'll have your 12 hours, Doctor. Count on it. As the first day of the great battle ended, Zefkari reviewed his observations. The humans had lost 4 ships and 600 Marines. They had saved 8,000 civilians and destroyed 2 enemy battlecruisers. By any military standard, they were losing badly. But something was wrong with his analysis. The humans didn't act like they were losing. They acted like they were exactly where they wanted to be. Their communications showed determination instead of despair. Their tactics became more creative as their situation became more desperate. Admiral Morrison ended the day with a message to all human forces. Today we proved that the Vraktari can be hurt. Tomorrow we prove they can be beaten. Get some rest, people. We have more work to do. Zefkari began to suspect that he was not observing a military defeat. He was watching something else entirely. Something that didn't fit any pattern he had studied. The humans were learning. With each battle, they understood their enemy better. They adapted faster than any species he had encountered. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be enjoying the challenge. War leader Krextoth had expected to crush primitive resistance. Instead, he was facing an enemy that treated his attacks as educational opportunities. And tomorrow they would be smarter, more dangerous, and more determined than today. The third day of battle began with devastating news for the human forces. Vraktari reinforcements had arrived during the night. War leader Krextoth now commanded over 80 ships, including their most powerful dreadnought, the Void Crusher. Admiral Morrison called an emergency meeting with his remaining captains. Zefkari listened to their conversation through intercepted communications. The humans had only 8 ships left in fighting condition. The colony's defenses were failing. Enemy forces had broken through the outer perimeter and were advancing toward the civilian shelters. Any rational species would begin surrender negotiations. The math was impossible. 8 ships could not defeat 80. A few thousand Marines could not stop an army. Morrison spoke to his officers with the same calm tone he had used throughout the battle. All right, people, here's the situation. We're outnumbered 10-1 in space and 50-1 on the ground. The enemy has us surrounded, outgunned, and cut off from reinforcements. He paused, and Zefkari expected to hear surrender terms. So, we're exactly where we want them, Morrison continued. They've committed their entire fleet to this system. Every ship they have is focused on us. That means they're not attacking other human colonies. We've got their complete attention. Captain Rodriguez had survived the destruction of the Phoenix by transferring to a medical frigate called the Mercy's Run. The ship was designed to evacuate wounded, not fight battles. Its weapons were minimal. Its armor was light, and its purpose was saving lives, not taking them. Lieutenant Commander Casey Walsh was the Mercy's Run pilot. She had been making evacuation runs for 3 days straight, flying through active combat zones to rescue civilians and wounded soldiers. Her ship showed damage from multiple near misses, but she kept flying. Casey, Morrison said, I need you to make 17 more runs to evacuate the remaining civilians. The enemy is going to focus their attack on the evacuation sites. You'll be flying directly into their weapons. Walsh's response came immediately. Understood, Admiral. 17 runs coming up. The Mercy's Run has never left anyone behind, and we're not starting today. What happened next would haunt Zefkari's memory for the rest of his existence. Walsh flew her medical frigate through the most intense combat zone he had ever observed. Enemy fighters swarmed around her ship, firing everything they had. Plasma bolts and missile explosions filled the space around the Mercy's Run. Walsh flew like she was dancing with death itself. She spun her ship between enemy attacks, using the frigate's superior maneuverability to avoid weapons that should have destroyed her instantly. When enemy fire did hit, she compensated by changing her flight patterns and using damaged systems in new ways. During her 5th evacuation run, the Mercy's Run lost its artificial gravity and life support systems. The crew was floating in zero gravity, breathing recycled air that would run out within hours. Most pilots would return to base for repairs. Walsh kept flying. Her voice came over the communications as she lined up for her 6th run. "Attention all passengers, this is your pilot speaking. We're experiencing some minor technical difficulties, which means everyone gets to experience the joys of zero gravity. Please hold on to something secure and try not to lose your lunch." She was making jokes while piloting a dying ship through active combat. On her 12th run, enemy fighters managed to damage the Mercy's run so badly that most of its systems failed. The ship was flying on backup power only. The navigation computer was destroyed, forcing Walsh to fly using manual controls and visual references. "This is the Mercy's run, requesting permission for another evacuation run." Walsh radioed to Admiral Morrison. "Casey, your ship is falling apart. You've already done the impossible 12 times. No one expects you to keep going." Walsh's laugh came through the communications clearly. "Admiral, with respect, I didn't join the fleet to do what people expected. I joined to do what people needed. There are still civilians down there, and this old bucket still flies. Requesting permission for Run 13. Morrison granted permission, though Zefkari could hear the pain in his voice. Walsh completed 17 evacuation runs over 18 hours. She saved over 2,000 civilians and 400 wounded soldiers. When her ship finally became too damaged to continue flying, she had evacuated every single person from the colony's emergency shelters. On the planet's surface, the situation was equally desperate. Sergeant Maria Santos led a squad of engineers who had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of the war. They needed to destroy the colony's mining equipment and industrial facilities so the Fractari couldn't use them. Santos and her team had to reach 12 different sites while enemy forces controlled most of the colony. They would be outnumbered at every location. The mission was essentially suicide, but the strategic value was enormous. Santos spoke to her team before they began their final mission. "All right, people, we all know how this ends. None of us are coming back from this, but our job is to make sure the enemy gets nothing useful from this colony." Her engineers responded with determination instead of fear. They had watched their friends die to protect civilians. Now it was their turn to contribute to the larger mission. Santos and her squad moved through the colony like ghosts, using maintenance tunnels and service corridors to avoid enemy patrols. At each target site, they planted explosives and disabled critical equipment. The work was dangerous and precise, requiring them to stay hidden while enemy forces searched for them. When Vraktari soldiers finally discovered their position at the main mining facility, Santos and her team were ready. They had prepared their final stand carefully, turning the industrial complex into a fortress. For 6 hours, 12 human engineers held off over 300 enemy soldiers. They used mining equipment as weapons, industrial chemicals as explosives, and their intimate knowledge of the facility's layout as tactical advantages. As enemy forces finally overwhelmed their position, Santos broadcast her final report to Admiral Morrison. Her voice was calm and professional, as if she was completing a routine assignment instead of facing death. "Admiral, this is Sergeant Santos. All 12 target sites have been destroyed. Mining equipment is unusable. Industrial facilities are demolished and computer systems have been wiped. Infrastructure denied, sir. It's been an honor." The transmission ended in static as enemy weapons silenced her position forever. Morrison's response came immediately over the general communications channel. "All units, Sergeant Santos and her team have completed their mission. The enemy will get nothing useful from this colony. Their sacrifice has meaning. Continue the mission." What disturbed Zefkari most was Morrison's tone. The Admiral wasn't mourning the loss of good soldiers. He was incorporating their deaths into his strategic planning. The humans didn't just accept casualties. They used them as tools for achieving larger objectives. Dr. Ellen Price had been working in her improvised laboratory for 36 hours without sleep. She had combined captured Vraktari technology with human engineering to create hybrid weapons that neither species had used before. Her first prototype was a modified plasma cannon that fired human-designed projectiles wrapped in Vraktari energy fields. The combination created weapons that could penetrate enemy shields while maintaining the reliability of human ballistic systems. When she demonstrated the new weapon for Admiral Morrison, the results exceeded all expectations. The hybrid cannon destroyed a Vraktari fighter with a single shot, something that normally required sustained fire from multiple human weapons. "Doctor, how many of these can you build?" Morrison asked. Price smiled with exhaustion and excitement. Give me the materials in 12 hours, and I can outfit every remaining ship with these modifications. But Admiral, this is just the beginning. I've figured out how their shield generators work. I know how to overload their targeting computers. I can turn their own technology against them. Morrison studied her technical readouts while explosions lit up the space around their ship. Doctor, you're telling me we can win this? I'm telling you we can do better than win, Price replied. We can teach them never to attack humans again. As the evacuation of New Denver reached its final stages, Zefkari realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic warfare. The humans had lost the colony, but they had accomplished something much more valuable. They had bled the Vraktari fleet badly. Enemy casualties were mounting faster than reinforcements could arrive. More importantly, the humans had captured enough enemy technology to reverse engineer weapons that could change the balance of power in future battles. War leader Krextoth had achieved a Pyrrhic victory. He controlled an empty colony on a devastated planet, but his fleet was badly damaged and his forces were demoralized. His soldiers had expected to crush primitive resistance quickly. Instead, they had fought the most brutal campaign of their military careers. Admiral Morrison prepared for the final phase of the evacuation. His remaining ships were damaged and low on ammunition. His crew was exhausted from days of continuous fighting. By every measure, the humans had been defeated. But Morrison's final message to his fleet suggested something different. All ships prepare for Phase 2 of the operation. The enemy thinks they've won. Time to show them how wrong they are. War leader Krextoth thought he had won. The human colony of New Denver was under his control. Most of the human fleet was destroyed or damaged beyond repair. The surviving human ships were retreating to the edge of the system, apparently preparing to flee. Krextoth called his victory complete and began preparing to move his fleet to the next human target. He had 87 ships ready for action, including reinforcements that had arrived during the battle. His forces controlled the planet and its surrounding space. Admiral Morrison had different plans. Zefkari watched as the remaining human ships took positions near the system's outer planets. Instead of fleeing, they were spreading out in what looked like a defensive formation. Morrison's voice came over the communications, speaking to his captains with unusual excitement. All right, people, it's time for the main event. For 3 months, we've been studying everything the Vraktari can do. We've learned their tactics, captured their technology, and identified their weaknesses. Today we find out if we learned enough. Commander Nick Thompson was leading a squadron of heavily damaged fighters. His ship, the Wasp, was held together with emergency patches and spare parts. Half his weapons were offline, his shields were gone, and his life support was running on backup power. Thompson's squadron had only 12 fighters left from an original force of 48. Every pilot was flying a damaged ship. They should have been grounded for repairs weeks ago, but these fighters carried Dr. Ellen Price's new hybrid weapons. Each ship had been modified with technology reverse-engineered from captured Vraktari equipment. The fighters looked like scrap metal, but they packed firepower that could surprise the enemy. Wasp Squadron, this is Thompson. The commander spoke to his pilots. Today we're going to show these bugs what humans do to species that attack our families. Remember, we're not trying to win pretty. We're trying to send a message that will be heard across the galaxy. The Vraktari had made a critical mistake. They had concentrated their entire fleet around New Denver, thinking the battle was over. Their ships were close together, making them perfect targets for the trap Morrison had been preparing. Dr. Price had been working on more than just new weapons. She had been studying Vraktari fleet formations, communication protocols, and targeting systems. Over 3 months of observation, she had learned to predict their behavior patterns. Admiral, Price reported from her laboratory, I've identified 17 critical weaknesses in their fleet deployment. Their command ship is using predictable communication frequencies. Their formation has gaps that our fighters can exploit. Most importantly, they've never faced coordinated attacks using their own technology against them. Morrison reviewed her tactical analysis while his ships moved into position. The plan was dangerous and required perfect timing. But if it worked, the humans would achieve something unprecedented in galactic warfare. All ships, prepare for Operation Reversal, Morrison announced. We've spent 3 months learning how to fight these creatures. Time to graduate. The attack began with Thompson's fighter squadron diving toward the Vraktari fleet at maximum speed. The enemy detected them immediately and opened fire with every available weapon. Plasma bolts and missiles filled space as the fighters approached. But something was wrong with the Vraktari targeting systems. Their weapons couldn't lock onto the human fighters properly. The shots that should have been perfectly accurate were missing by significant margins. Dr. Price had modified the fighters' signatures to confuse enemy sensors. The Vraktari computers couldn't distinguish between their own technology and the human modifications. Their automated systems were trying to target their own equipment. Thompson's voice came over the communications as his squadron penetrated the enemy formation. Target acquired. Beginning our final run. All fighters, remember what we're fighting for. Remember who we're fighting for. His squadron of 12 damaged fighters attacked the Vraktari flagship, the Void Crusher. The massive dreadnought had shields that could stop conventional attacks from entire fleets. Its armor was designed to withstand anything smaller than a nuclear weapon. Thompson's fighters were carrying something different. Dr. Price had created weapons that used Vraktari energy signatures to bypass their own defensive systems. The hybrid missiles looked like friendly fire to the enemy's computers. "This is Thompson to all units," the commander transmitted as his squadron approached the flagship. "Tell my family I kept my promise. Tell the enemy they picked the wrong species to fight. 12 human fighters attacked a ship that carried 10,000 crew members. It should have been suicide with no meaningful results." The hybrid weapons penetrated the Void Crusher's shields without resistance. The missiles struck the dreadnought's reactor core with perfect accuracy. The massive ship exploded in a flash of light that temporarily blinded sensors throughout the system. Thompson and his entire squadron died in the explosion, but they had accomplished the impossible. They had destroyed the most powerful ship in the Vraktari fleet, using fighters that were barely able to fly. The destruction of the flagship was only the beginning. Admiral Morrison had positioned his remaining ships to take advantage of the chaos that would follow. As the Void Crusher exploded, human vessels emerged from hiding. Positions behind asteroids and small, Moon's Lieutenant Commander Casey Walsh was piloting a modified transport ship called the New Hope. The vessel had been rebuilt using captured Vraktari technology, turning a civilian transport into a stealth warship. Walsh's experience flying damaged ships through combat zones made her perfect for the dangerous mission Morrison had planned. "New Hope to all units," Walsh transmitted as her ship approached the confused enemy fleet. "Beginning precision strikes on command vessels. Let's see how well they coordinate without their leaders." The transport ship moved through the Vraktari formation like a ghost, using stealth technology the enemy couldn't detect. Walsh targeted communication ships and command vessels, destroying the fleet's ability to coordinate their response. Each attack used weapons specifically, designed to penetrate Vraktari defenses. Dr. Price had spent weeks studying captured technology to create counters for every defensive system the enemy used. Captain Rodriguez, now commanding a newly built destroyer called the Phoenix Rising, led the main assault against the confused enemy fleet. Her ship was equipped with the most advanced hybrid weapons Price had developed. "This is for the original Phoenix," Rodriguez announced as she opened fire on a Vraktari battlecruiser. "This is for every civilian they killed. This is for teaching them that humans don't forget, and we don't forgive." The Phoenix Rising destroyed 3 enemy ships in rapid succession. Each attack used different modified weapons, preventing the Vraktari from adapting their defenses. Price had created a technological arsenal that stayed one step ahead of enemy countermeasures. Colonel Sam Blake coordinated the ground assault from New Denver's surface. His Marines had been hiding in the colony's underground tunnels, waiting for the space battle to begin. When the Void Crusher exploded, they emerged to attack the confused Vraktari occupation forces. Blake's troops were equipped with weapons they had captured and modified during the siege. They knew the colony's layout better than the enemy, and used that knowledge to devastating effect. "All Marines, this is Blake," the colonel transmitted to his scattered forces. "The fleet is doing their job. Time for us to do ours. Show these invaders what happens when they mess with human territory." The Marines attacked from hidden positions throughout the colony. They used modified Vraktari weapons to destroy enemy equipment and communication centers. Within 2 hours, they had recaptured most of the colony's key facilities. Dr. Price watched the battle from her laboratory aboard the UES Defiance, monitoring the performance of her hybrid technologies. The results exceeded her most optimistic projections. Human forces were destroying enemy ships faster than the Vraktari could respond. "Admiral," she reported to Morrison, "our weapons are performing beyond specifications. Enemy shields are useless against our modifications. Their targeting systems can't track our modified ships. We've effectively turned their own technology into a weapon against them." Morrison studied the tactical display as human forces systematically destroyed the Vraktari fleet. "Doctor, what are our casualty estimates?" "Surprisingly low, sir. We've lost Thompson's squadron and 2 other ships, but we've destroyed over 40 enemy vessels. The exchange ratio is heavily in our favor. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Vraktari fleet had been effectively destroyed. Only 12 enemy ships escaped the system, carrying news of their defeat back to Vraktari space. War leader Krextoth was among the survivors, but his career was over. He had lost 2/3 of his fleet to a supposedly primitive species. Worse, he had to explain how humans had used Vraktari technology better than the Vraktari themselves. Admiral Morrison addressed his victorious fleet as they secured the system. "Today we proved something important. Humans don't just fight wars. We study them, learn from them, and turn them into opportunities for growth." Dr. Price was already analyzing wreckage from destroyed enemy ships, looking for new technologies to incorporate into human designs. "Admiral." The aftermath of the battle left Zefkari struggling to understand what he had witnessed. His mission had been simple: observe human military capabilities and report whether they deserved membership in the Galactic Collective. Now he faced the impossible task of explaining to the synthesis that everything they knew about warfare had just changed. Admiral Morrison walked through the medical bay of the UES Defiance, visiting wounded crew members from the battle. Zefkari listened to his conversations, trying to understand how humans processed such devastating conflict. Captain Rodriguez was recovering from injuries sustained when her ship was hit by enemy fire. Her left arm was in a medical cast and she had burns across half her face. She should have been focused on her own pain and the trauma of battle. Instead, she was asking Morrison about casualty reports from other ships. "Admiral, what's our final count?" Rodriguez asked as Morrison sat beside her medical bed. "We lost 437 people during the operation," Morrison replied. "Thompson's entire squadron, 2 destroyer crews, and Blake's Marines who held the ground positions." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, processing the numbers. "That's a lot of good people, sir." Morrison nodded. "Yes, it is. But Lisa, we saved over 20,000 civilians. We captured technology that will protect human colonies for generations. Most importantly, we sent a message to every hostile species in the galaxy." "What message is that, sir?" Morrison's voice was calm but carried an edge that made Zefkari's skin crawl. "That attacking humans costs more than leaving us alone." The conversation continued, but Zefkari was disturbed by what he had heard. Morrison wasn't just mourning his losses or celebrating his victory. He was calculating the strategic value of human sacrifice. Each death had meaning in a larger plan that extended far beyond this single battle. Dr. Ellen Price was working in her expanded laboratory, which now occupied 3 decks of the Defiance. Her team had salvaged technology from 43 destroyed Vraktari ships. The amount of advanced equipment was staggering. Price spoke to Morrison as she examined a captured shield generator. "Admiral, we've identified components that are centuries ahead of our current technology. Anti-gravity systems, energy manipulation devices, faster-than-light communication equipment. We can reverse engineer all of it." Morrison studied her preliminary reports while damage control teams repaired battle damage throughout the ship. "How long before we can implement these technologies in our fleet?" 6 months for basic upgrades. 2 years for complete integration. But Admiral, that's not the most significant discovery. Price activated a holographic display showing technical specifications that Zefkari couldn't fully understand. These Vraktari ships contain technology from 17 different species. They've been conquering civilizations and stealing their innovations for centuries. Morrison considered the implications. "You're telling me we've captured the accumulated knowledge of 17 alien civilizations?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Price replied with excitement. "We didn't just defeat the Vraktari. We inherited their entire technological database. Every species they conquered, every innovation they stole, it's all here for us to study and improve." Zefkari felt a chill of fear as he understood what Price was suggesting. Humans had gained access to technologies from dozens of species, many of them more advanced than the synthesis itself. They would spend the next few years learning to use capabilities that other civilizations had developed over millennia. Colonel Blake was debriefing his Marines in the Defiance's main conference room. The soldiers who had survived the ground campaign looked exhausted but victorious. They had accomplished something that military analysts would study for generations. "People, you held an impossible position against overwhelming odds," Blake told his troops. "You protected 20,000 civilians while outnumbered 50 to 1. You turned a mining colony into a fortress and held it, long enough for the fleet to prepare their counterattack." Sergeant Maria Santos had been posthumously promoted for her sacrifice in destroying the colony's infrastructure. Her squad had died completing their mission, but their actions had denied critical resources to the enemy. Blake continued his address to the surviving Marines. Santos and her team proved something important. When humans are willing to die for a cause, we become unstoppable. The enemy had better weapons, better armor, and better numbers, but they couldn't match our determination. One of the younger Marines raised his hand. "Colonel, what happens now?" "The Vraktari will tell other species about what happened here. Won't that make us targets?" Blake smiled, and Zefkari noticed the same predatory expression he had seen on Morrison's face. "Son, let them spread the word. Let every hostile species in the galaxy know what happens when they attack human colonies. Fear is a weapon, and we just gave our enemies plenty of reasons to be afraid." Zefkari began compiling his final report for the synthesis, but he struggled to find words that could convey what he had observed. His superiors expected a standard military assessment. They wanted to know if humans were peaceful, enough for galactic society, or aggressive enough to be contained. The truth was more complex and more terrifying than either. Commander Nick Thompson's sacrifice haunted Zefkari's memory. The human pilot had led 11 other fighters in a suicide attack against impossible odds. Before dying, Thompson had transmitted a message that revealed something crucial about human psychology. "Tell my family I kept my promise," Thompson had said. "Tell the enemy they picked the wrong species to fight." Zefkari researched Thompson's background through intercepted human communications. The commander had 3 children and a wife waiting for him on a distant colony. He had promised them he would return safely from the war, but when faced with the choice between personal survival and tactical advantage, Thompson had chosen to break his promise to his family in order to keep a larger promise to his species. He had sacrificed his own happiness to ensure human victory. This willingness to subordinate individual desires to collective survival was unprecedented in Zefkari's experience. Most species fought for territory, resources, or dominance. Humans seemed to fight for concepts that transcended immediate physical needs. Admiral Morrison held a memorial service for the humans who had died during the campaign. Zefkari listened to the speeches, trying to understand how humans processed grief and loss. "We gather today to honor 437 of our people who gave their lives for human freedom," Morrison began. "They died far from home, facing impossible odds, surrounded by enemies who showed no mercy." The Admiral paused, looking at the assembled crew members who had survived the battle. But they didn't die in vain. Every sacrifice had meaning. Every life lost bought time for civilians to escape, information for our scientists to study, or tactical advantage for our forces to exploit. Morrison's tone became harder as he continued. "The enemy thought they could break our will by killing our people. They were wrong. Every human death made us more determined. Every loss taught us something new about how to fight them better." Dr. Price approached Morrison after the memorial service with a disturbing revelation. She had been analyzing communication intercepts from fleeing Vraktari ships. "Admiral, the surviving enemy commanders are broadcasting warnings about us to their entire species," Price reported. "They're telling other Vraktari forces to avoid human space at all costs. They're describing us as unpredictable and extremely dangerous." Morrison seemed pleased by this news. "Good. Fear will protect our colonies better than any weapon we could build." But Price had more information. "Sir, it's not just the Vraktari. Our communication intercepts suggest that 17 different species have received reports about this battle. Word is spreading throughout this sector of the galaxy." Morrison considered the strategic implications. "Doctor, are you telling me that every hostile species within 50 light-years now knows about human military capabilities?" "Yes, sir. But more than that, They know about our willingness to use those capabilities. The reports emphasize our psychological approach to warfare as much as our technology. Zefkari realized that the battle for New Denver had achieved something beyond military victory. It had established humanity's reputation throughout local galactic society. Other species would now factor human psychology into their strategic planning. The humans had weaponized their own reputation. As Zefkari prepared to leave the system, he intercepted a conversation between Morrison and Price that crystallized his fears about humanity's future role in galactic affairs. "Doctor, how many alien technologies have we successfully reverse-engineered?" Morrison asked. 17 different systems, Admiral. Anti-gravity propulsion, energy shielding, automated manufacturing, advanced metallurgy, quantum communication, and 12 others. We've essentially gained centuries of technological development in 3 months. Morrison studied reports from human intelligence services. "What about our defensive preparations? Are we ready for the next attack?" Price smiled with confidence that disturbed Zefkari. "Admiral, we're ready for attacks from technologies we haven't even encountered yet. I've used principles from captured alien systems to develop countermeasures for weapons that don't exist in human space."